It didn't start with a speech. Or a courtroom. Or a headline scrolling across 1,000 glowing screens. It started with a silence. A silence thick enough to feel. Heavy enough to bend a city's spine. New York. Before dawn. Cold air clinging to steel and brick like memory refusing to leave. A convoy rolled slowly through the streets, quiet, unmarked, windows black as midnight thoughts. Inside, the only sound, a soft tap of fingers against leather. Measured. Controlled. A man thinking 10 moves ahead while the world lagged behind, still arguing about the first one. They said this wasn't supposed to happen. That history couldn't bend like this. That power didn't pivot, it crushed, it punished, it erased those who dared to challenge its geometry. And yet, somewhere between the courthouse lights and the whispers of Wall Street corridors, a line had been crossed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just inevitable. Most Americans slept through it. But their future didn't. A precedent snapped, quietly, like a dry twig beneath a boot. The kind of snap only heard by those who are listening. Really listening. And in that thin blue hour when the city exhaled, power shifted hands. Not in the way textbooks promise. But in the way empires always truly change. In silence. In strategy. In the shadows where legacy is sculpted and destiny is purchased. Yesterday, something happened no one saw coming. A country cheered, but something deeper was trembling. Because one man, one polarizing force of nature, did something nobody believed he could. And somewhere in the Bronx, in a modest apartment smelling of chalk dust and morning coffee, another man, a thinker, a builder, a political craftsman, felt the floor shift beneath him. Mamdani. The professor. The ideologue. The quiet architect of a rising movement. Now staring at the kind of political tremor you don't see. You feel. His world moved. Not violently. Not obviously. But with the cold precision of a hand rewriting rules from behind the curtain. Power doesn't shout. Not when it knows it already owns the room. It whispers. And everyone else learns to lean in. Hit subscribe and tell me. What would you do if your world changed overnight? The city held its breath. And that's where this story begins. A dawn breaking not just over America, but over the idea of America. A reckoning built not in mobs or marches, but in paperwork, in precedent. In the quiet violence of policy. History didn't knock. It let itself in. And everything. Quietly. Shifted. Pause here. Let the silence sink. Because some moments don't explode. They seep. And that's how power really moves. Fade to black. 3 words linger in the air. It just started. Before the headlines. Before the pundits sharpened their tongues like blades. Before Twitter feeds turned into digital battlegrounds and families whispered politics like forbidden prayers at dinner tables. There was a boy. Not a symbol. Not yet a theory in motion or a movement waiting for ignition. Just a kid in Queens. Staring out a window at a city that promised everything. And delivered nothing without a fight. He didn't choose this world. He was born into it. A world of loud power and quiet rules. Of men who built things with their hands. And men who built empires with their signatures. He watched skyscrapers rise like monuments to ambition. Watched fathers leave early and return late. Watched how the city rewarded hunger and punished hesitation. America wasn't clean. It wasn't gentle. But it never lied about one thing. If you were strong enough. Ruthless enough. Relentless enough. You could change the world. Or at least carve your initials into it. He saw wealth shimmer from penthouse glass. while single mothers counted bills in fluorescent kitchens. He watched businessmen shake hands in polished lobbies. And watched broken men argue with themselves on corner benches, trying to remember where their dignity slipped through the cracks. That boy learned early. Systems don't care about fairness. They care about obedience. And those who challenge the system, they don't get applause. They get consequences. Trump didn't rise by accident. He rose by collision. With media, with elites, with the ritual comfort of doing what you're told. And somewhere across the river, a different child sat in a different room, listening to the hum of city buses outside. Hands stained with pencil lead. Thinking not about buildings, but about ideas. Mamdani grew among books and questions. History framed his world the way steel framed Trump's. Where one saw ambition, the other saw structure, and believed it could be rebuilt. Two boys. Two schools of America. Two visions shaped by opposite corners of the same concrete jungle. One would become a titan who mastered the rules. The other a scholar determined to rewrite them. And neither understood that someday their paths would crash. Not in battlefields of bullets or bombs, but in battlegrounds of belief. Education didn't just teach Mamdani facts. It carved his worldview with surgical precision. Professors who spoke of justice. Seminars on systems. Ideas dipped in moral certainty. And chalk-dusted notions of what fairness should look like. If only someone had the courage. Or the power. To impose it. He began to see America not as a dream, but as an imbalance. A structure leaning toward the strong. A country that crowned those who took, not those who thought. The university halls applauded his ambition. Not the ambition to build, but the ambition to change. To challenge. To correct. To reshape a nation in the image of intellectual righteousness. Trump played the game of power. Mamdani dreamed of rewriting the board. Both believed they understood America. Both were right. And both were wrong. Because America isn't one nation. It's two. The one you live in. And the one you imagine exists. The working-class diner booth. Coffee still steaming at 5 a.m. And the tenured lecture hall. Breathing theory like oxygen. One world learns discipline from hardship. The other learns certainty from philosophy. One sees the system as a ladder. The other sees it as a cage. Truth lives somewhere in between. But truth rarely gets a microphone. Years later, Trump stood at podiums. And crowds roared like thunder rolling across a heartland field. Their anger was not confusion. It was memory. A memory of being forgotten. And Mamdani stood in wood-paneled rooms, filled with earnest nodding heads and polished debate, where ideals grew tall, but consequences lived far away. Two Americas. One forged in sweat and debt and restless nights. One forged in libraries and manifestos and moral blueprints. And when power finally shifted, it didn't scream. It moved like a chess piece sliding across velvet. Soft, deliberate, irreversible. A legal filing. A procedural twist. A boundary tested, then erased. Quiet ink on quiet paper. Trump had played his card. Not force. Not fury. Precision. He didn't break the system. He understood it. Better than the people who built it. And Mamdani, with decades of theory behind him, felt the weight of reality press against idealism. Like a cold hand on a warm neck. This wasn't about right or wrong. It wasn't about political tribes. Or cable news slogans. Or hashtags performing righteousness for strangers online. This was about power. Pure. Ancient. Unapologetic. And in America, power never sleeps. It recalibrates. Some nights it wears a suit. Some nights a robe. Some nights a crowd's energy like armor. And sometimes, just sometimes, it wears silence like a crown. When Trump made his move, the world asked, why now? But people who ask that have never truly studied power. Power doesn't wait for permission. It waits for weakness. For distraction. For opportunity disguised as inevitability. A professor builds arguments. A builder builds pressure. And when those two worlds collide, the louder voice doesn't always win. Sometimes, the one who wins is the one who knows the rules others forgot to read. Mamdani stared into the shift and felt something rare for a thinker. Not anger. Not certainty. But doubt. Doubt, the quiet dread that maybe, just maybe, ideas alone aren't enough to stop a man who doesn't fear breaking norms. Because he's already survived breaking expectations. This wasn't chaos. It was strategy. Cold as winter pavement. Precise as a scalpel. And as the city woke. As screens flickered to life. As America sipped its first bitter coffee of a new reality. Two men stood on opposite ends of a nation's soul. One reshaping rules from the ground he built on. The other realizing theories bend. When power decides they should. Sometimes history moves loud. This time, it moved quiet. And for the first time, the scholar understood what the builder had always known. Systems don't protect truth. They protect power. Everything else is decoration. Pause. A breath in the dark. And that was the moment everything shifted. And that's when everything changed. At first, it looked like nothing. A procedural move. A line in a document. Another headline in a nation drowning in headlines. The kind of thing most people scroll past while waiting for their coffee order. Or sitting in traffic with one hand on the wheel. And the other flicking notifications like crumbs from a table. No smoke. No riots. No chants echoing across city streets. Power rarely arrives with boots anymore. Now it arrives in print. Signed, stamped, sealed. And executed with the precision of a surgeon and the quiet of a whisper. But whispers can move mountains. If spoken at the right moment. And this one did. Somewhere between dawn and disbelief. Mamdani realized something chilling. The rules weren't changing. They had already changed. He sat at his desk. Papers neatly aligned. A scholar's instinct, order against chaos. But his thoughts were scattered like leaves in winter wind. On the surface, his world looked the same. The same chalkboard filled with diagrams of power and justice. The same well-worn academic couch where activists once sat. Legs crossed, notebooks open, eyes burning with ideological certainty. The same sunlight filtering through blinds. Painting stripes across shelves stacked with books. That promised frameworks, solutions, futures. But something was different. One truth hung in the air like static before a storm. Theory bends when power decides it will. And power had just shown its hand. Not through force. Through fluency. Trump didn't fight the system that day. He spoke its language better than the men who wrote the dictionary. He didn't storm the gates. He unlocked them. With a key everyone assumed he'd never find. That's the thing about underestimating a man. You don't see him learning. You only see him strike. And by the time you realize what happened, you're already standing in a different country. Shaped by the same land. But ruled by a different logic. At first, Mamdani tried to rationalize. This is temporary. A reaction, not a restructure. A moment, not a precedent. But history doesn't deal in moments. It deals in shifts. And this one was tectonic. He could feel it in his pulse. Fast and uneven like a drum losing time. He could feel it in the air. Students whispering uncertainty instead of confidence. Colleagues speaking lower than usual. As if caution was suddenly wise again. A single move had flipped the polarity of certainty. Not loud. Not drastic. Just real. And the reality was unsettling. Because for the first time in a long time, the intellectual class didn't feel invincible. They felt watched. Not by mobs. Not by mobs. But by power itself. Eyes open, calculating, unafraid to respond. News anchors filled screens with concern. Voice rising, brow furrowed, dramatic graphics spinning behind them. They spoke as if reading eulogies for a system they never truly understood. Beyond the teleprompter's glow. And in kitchens and living rooms across the country. Americans paused mid-bite, mid-sip, mid-routine. Not fully understanding what happened. But recognizing the shift in tone. Freedom doesn't always fall with a crash. Sometimes it trembles first. Sometimes the warning sign isn't noise. But the absence of it. A calm too heavy. Too deliberate. Like breath held by a nation. Waiting to see which way the ground will tilt. In Washington, some celebrated. Quietly. Carefully. The kind of restrained triumph men wear. When they know victory isn't final. But it is real. In campus halls, frustration simmered. That familiar righteous fire burning hotter than logic. Fueled by theory, conviction. And the fragile belief that ideas alone shape destiny. And in the Bronx. In that chalk-scented apartment. Mamdani stared into the uncomfortable space between expectation and outcome. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He was something far worse. He was aware. Aware that change rarely announces itself. Aware that the world doesn't shift when you're ready. It shifts when someone else decides it should. Aware that while scholars debate morality, builders bend reality. And in that moment, the professor felt something he'd never admit out loud. A quiet envy of the man who didn't wait for permission to shape history. Because conviction is noble. But power is effective. Outside, New York buses rumbled. Storefront gates rolled open. Construction hammers echoed through the morning air. Life went on. It always does, until it doesn't. Most people never know the moment their world changes. They live through it like background noise. Only realizing later the soundtrack had shifted. And the scene was already different. This was one of those moments. A pivot disguised as paperwork. A precedent dressed in procedure. A lesson carved into the spine of the American experiment. You don't win power by holding it. You win by using it. And slowly, unmistakably, a question began to rise. Not in the streets. But in the silence between headlines. If rules can bend for one man, who decides when they bend back? The tension tightened. Like a violin string at the edge of snapping. Not chaos. Not order. Something in between. Something ancient and modern at once. A truth whispered beneath the surface. The system never breaks suddenly. It unthreads, one quiet pull at a time. Fade the lights. Lower the score. Let the air thicken. Because the question was never who won. The question was who decides what winning means. Scene fades. Black screen. 3 seconds of silence. And the silence felt louder. There's a moment in history. When illusion dissolves. And what felt like a political disagreement suddenly becomes a mirror. Not of policy. Not of party. But of power. And now, that mirror was standing in front of America. Cold, tall, unforgiving. The headlines said one thing. Reality whispered another. What looked like law was leverage. What looked like punishment was positioning. What looked like chaos was design. Trump hadn't reacted. He had anticipated. Prepared. Waited for the right fracture in the armor of the system. And pressed, just enough to make it bend. But not break loud enough for anyone to call it treason. A move disguised as a moment. A strike disguised as a stance. A message disguised as a procedural footnote. I understand your system better than you do. Across the river. Mamdani felt it. Not as a headline. But as a dismantling. Ideas that once sat like monuments in his mind. Now shivered. Fragile in the wind of something bigger than theory. Reality. Theory explains power. Power ignores theory. That's the rule. Always has been. And in this quiet dawn, the professor learned the difference between studying the game and facing a player who changed it. He had spent years telling rooms of young minds that systems bend when voices rise loud enough. That courage and collective action shape the arc of justice. That change comes from moral force. But moral force without actual force is just hope in formal language. And hope, without leverage, is just noise. The public didn't see the details. They saw headlines. They heard commentary. But they missed the architecture beneath. The move wasn't about punishment. It was about principle. A new one, sharper than the old. One that didn't bow to narrative. One that didn't fear backlash. One that understood something fundamental. Politics isn't about right or wrong. It's about who has the power to say which is which. And Trump, whatever you believe about him, had just reclaimed the microphone. Not by force. By fluency. He played the system like a grand piano. Each key a code. Each note a loophole. Each chord a precedent. And while half the country called it reckless, the other half recognized something darker, stronger, undeniable. Competence. Not the polite, academic kind. The raw, survival kind. That cities like New York raise in their steel bones. And courtroom corners. He didn't storm the gates. He read the instructions stapled to the side of them. And then used the gate as a door. People forget. Power has two versions. The one taught. And the one practiced. Only one matters. Mamdani had believed ideas shape nations. And they do. But only when they find a hand bold enough to wield them. Or weak enough to be bent by someone else's. He sat still. Hearing the radiator hiss. Hearing footsteps in the hallway. Hearing the hum of a city waking up to the same streets. But a different logic. This is the moment where ideology stops being philosophy. And becomes a question. What happens when someone uses the rules? The way you imagined only the righteous would? A system isn't broken when someone abuses it. A system is broken when someone uses it exactly as written. And still wins like this. That's the part people don't understand. Corruption screams. Power whispers. Most never hear it. Most never notice they're living through a pivot in history. Until the paint is dry. And the new building stands where the old ideals used to be. Phones buzzed. Screens lit. Politicians rehearsed outrage. Journalists sharpened their monologues. But none of that was the story. The story was this. Power just proved it doesn't need permission. And if one man can redefine the boundaries, So can the next. And the next. Precedent is a key that unlocks both ways. Those who celebrate today may fear tomorrow. Those who fear today may rise tomorrow. History does not decide who wins. Power does. And power does not live in outrage. It lives in execution. Someone understood that. Someone used that. And now, all Mamdani could do was sit in the stillness and understand the truth behind the truth. The system didn't fail. It functioned exactly as designed. Just not by the designer the elites had imagined. Fade. Slow. Quiet as an exhale in a dark room. Ellipsis hangs like breath on glass. And that's when he understood. He wasn't playing chess. He was the board. There's a silence before a storm. That isn't peace. It's calculation. The city felt it. Like steel tightening underground. Like subway rails humming before the train arrives. Like the tension in the air. Right before a crowd breaks into a run. Something had shifted. Not policy. Not pageantry. Balance. And for the first time in years, the world wasn't arguing about Trump. It was reacting to him. Not emotionally. Strategically. That's when you know a new era has begun. In that Bronx apartment, light hit the professor's face like a confession. Mamdani wasn't used to losing ground. He was used to debating it. Defending it. Defining it with confident strokes of chalk and theory. Pacing classrooms with the calm certainty of a man who believed the future belonged to those who could articulate justice. But articulation is not execution. Language is not leverage. And now, for the first time in his carefully ordered life, he felt the floor shudder beneath him. Not collapse. Just shift. How do you fight power that doesn't defend itself? Just acts. Ideology meets reality. And reality doesn't blink. This wasn't a debate. It was a demonstration. A reminder carved into the spine of the nation. Ideas inspire people. Power moves them. And when those two forces collide, the one holding the mechanism of action wins. Even if the other writes the essays afterwards, explaining why it shouldn't have happened. Across the country, screens filled with warnings. Panic, celebration. Laughter, fear, confusion. The full American orchestra of outrage and applause. Cable hosts talked like prophets. Influencers raged like oracles. Academics whispered like monks. Watching scripture burn. But none of it changed the basic truth. A man who was supposed to be finished had made a move that felt final. Not for him, but for the assumptions everyone else lived inside. The storm wasn't in the streets. It was in the mind. And storms in the mind are the most dangerous kind. They don't destroy cities. They reshape futures. Somewhere in a suburban kitchen, a father looked up from his morning paper and murmured, "I didn't think he had it in him." Somewhere in a quiet lecture hall, a student whispered, "If he can do that, what can he do next?" And somewhere in a boardroom, with lights low and voices lower, men who never feared elections began to fear precedent. Because when rules bend once, they bend again. Not back. Forward. And the uncomfortable truth that no side ever wants to admit settled over the nation like dust on an untouched flag. The system doesn't protect democracy. It protects whoever holds it firmly enough. Not right. Not wrong. Just power. Pure. Primal. Unnegotiated. Mamdani's breath slowed. His hands folded. Not in surrender. In realization. There are moments in life when the room feels suddenly smaller. When the ceiling lowers. When the world you built in your mind meets the world someone else built in reality. A scholar can predict the storm. Only a leader survives it. He saw students marching in his mind. Protests swelling. Speeches booming. But for the first time, he also saw something else. A counterforce. Not violent. Not loud. Just inevitable. A hand turning a wheel. Bigger than slogans. Bigger than rallies. Bigger than righteous fury. America wasn't breaking. It was transitioning. And transitions are terrifying. For those who assumed permanence. He stood. Slow, deliberate. And walked to the window. Outside, kids ran for school buses. Delivery trucks rumbled. A lone siren wailed somewhere far enough away to feel like a memory instead of a threat. Life was moving. Not waiting for ideology. Not bowing to theory. Just moving. People forget. Revolutions don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper. Through signatures. Procedures. And men who refuse to lose. Trump didn't overthrow the system. He operated it. Like a conductor rediscovering a score. Everyone else was reading politely. Instead of playing powerfully. Control doesn't look like chaos. It looks like confidence. And confidence is contagious. The storm was not violence. It was clarity. A sudden, unnerving clarity that swept across a nation and whispered. If one man can shift the axis. Maybe the axis wasn't where we thought it was. And that thought. That seed. Can topple more certainty. Than any riot ever could. Because the most dangerous revolution. Isn't physical. It's conceptual. Once you see power move silently. You never believe noise is strength again. The professor inhaled. Soft, shaky, unsteady in a way he had never known. And in that breath. Something inside him cracked. Not pride. Not ego. Assumption. And once assumption breaks. Doubt enters like wine through shattered glass. The storm doesn't start outside. It starts within. Silence settles. Weighty. Inevitable. And then. A whisper in the dark. If he can do that. What else can he do? Thunder without thunder. Lightning without sky. And then, silence spoke louder. But history. It never moves in straight lines. It bends. It fractures. It stalls in silence before erupting into noise. And in that silence, a nation asks itself a single question. If the system can bend for one man, can it break for all of us? Because this was never just about a verdict. Not really. It was about power, how it's gained, how it's lost. And what happens when millions believe it no longer belongs to them. In living rooms and diners across America. In quiet prayers whispering through Sunday chapels. In phone calls between friends who swear they never talk about politics. A new tension settled over the country. Not fear. Not outrage. Something stranger. Expectation. Like the air before a storm. Thick. Heavy. Electric. A belief, whispered, but growing. That whatever comes next will rewrite the meaning of authority in America. And so, the nation waits. On the edge of a chapter no one voted to enter. Yet everyone must now read. But fate doesn't wait forever. And the silence. That tense, breath-held calm. Began to crack. Not with riots. Not with politicians shouting into microphones. And not with the usual noise of a nation addicted to outrage. It began in a far quieter place. The institutions themselves. Courts whispering behind closed doors. Judges rereading precedents no one has touched in half a century. Generals asking quiet questions about unity. About order. About the responsibility of power when a country no longer trusts it. A constitution printed on paper. Now trembling under the weight of modern chaos. Because the founders never imagined. 24-hour news cycles hungry for fear. Or social networks weaponizing truth and lies alike. Or a nation where every citizen carries a digital megaphone. Louder than a press room in 1965. This was no longer politics. It was faith. In systems, in leaders, in the very idea of America. And faith, once shaken, rarely settles back into place quietly. Somewhere in those quiet corridors of power, a realization crept in like winter frost. If the people stop believing in the rules stop meaning anything at all. And history, with cold, patient eyes, watched the moment a nation felt the ground shift beneath its feet. Then came the moment. No pundit, no pollster, no strategist could quite capture. The quiet split. Not a civil war. No flags raised, no generals marching. Something far more dangerous. A psychological secession. A break not of land, but of belief. On one side, citizens who whispered, the institutions must hold, even if we disagree. On the other, millions convinced, with a certainty deeper than logic, that the system had chosen sides. And the people were no longer invited to the table. Not a clash of armies. A clash of realities. Courthouses fortified not against mobs, but against distrust. Lawyers preparing arguments not for legal doctrine, but for the soul of legitimacy itself. Security briefings suddenly filled with words once unthinkable. Stability. Continuity. Domestic fracture. It felt subtle at first. Like a hairline crack in glass. But anyone who's ever held broken glass knows the truth. It never breaks all at once. It spiderwebs, slowly, beautifully, inevitably. Until the final snap arrives without warning. And in coffee shops, church pews, Wall Street elevators, rural gas stations. An anxiety spread. If this falls apart, what comes after? Because the danger was never chaos. The danger was belief collapsing. And when belief collapses, governments don't fall like empires in old history books. They dissolve. Quietly. From the inside out. America had not broken. Not yet. But for the first time in generations, you could feel the fault line. Breathing. Growing. Waiting. And then, almost imperceptibly, the pressure found a voice. Not from Washington. Not from cable news. Not from the booming certainty of politicians who mistake volume for vision. It came from somewhere far older. And far more powerful. The American instinct. That stubborn, restless pulse that refuses to bow. To kings, to institutions, to fate written by anyone else's hand. A question rose in the national bloodstream. Quiet at first. Then louder. If the system serves itself, who, exactly, does it represent? This wasn't rebellion. Not yet. It was recognition. A sense, spreading like dawn across a sleeping landscape. That power had drifted too far from the people who gave it life. Blue-collar fathers staring at late-night talk shows in silence. Suburban mothers scrolling through headlines at the kitchen table. Feeling something they couldn't name yet, but understood in their bones. Young men and women who had never cared for politics. Suddenly speaking in hushed tones. Not about left or right. But about fairness. About trust. About whether the country they were handed still belonged to them at all. This was the moment before moments. The inhale before history exhales. A turning point not marked by protest signs or breaking news cheer-ins. But by a feeling that America was nearing a choice no ballot box had ever truly prepared it for. And somewhere, unseen but unmistakable, a new chapter stirred. Not driven by ideology, but by a return to something older than government itself. The belief that power must answer to the people, or it ceases to be power at all. The storm was no longer approaching. It was already here. Silent, gathering, inevitable. But storms don't always begin with thunder. Sometimes they start with a man standing alone in a building built for power. A pen in his hand. A signature that should have been routine. A moment history barely noticed. Until suddenly, everyone did. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound a table. He didn't march in front of cameras and demand the world look at him. He just acted. Quietly. Decisively. Like a man who understood that hesitation is how empires fall. And that sometimes, history turns not by force, but by clarity. Trump didn't destroy an opponent. He disrupted a design. He didn't take aim at a man. He took aim at a system. A structure of influence, wrapped in academia, activism, and moral armor. That had gone untouched for decades. A political professor. Known not just for ideas, but for engineering power in ways most voters never saw. Never voted for. Never even knew existed. He wasn't removed from the stage. He was removed from the levers behind it. And that was the real earthquake. Because power rarely screams when you confront it. It whispers. It rearranges. It tightens its grip, silently. Hoping no one sees what's slipping through its fingers. The headlines called it a political move. Some called it revenge. Others called it chaos. But beneath every opinion, beneath every broadcast and every trembling voice on social media, one truth throbbed like a pulse. Someone finally pulled back the curtain. And the machine that had always operated in shadows suddenly felt light on its skin. It recoiled. It strategized. It waited for the American mind to drift back to sleep. But this time, it didn't. Something ancient had been awakened. Not rage, not fanfare. But awareness. A slow, rising realization. You can control laws. You can control media. You can shape culture in classrooms, in headlines, in algorithms. But you cannot control a nation once it remembers its power. Not forever. Not here. Not in America. And that was the quiet beginning of the reckoning. The moment political chess became a mirror, forcing every side to see what they had become. The scene fades. Not into applause, but into a deeper question. If truth threatens power, which one survives? A breath. A beat. The camera cuts to black. Next time, everything shifts. The night passes. Slowly. Like syrup over stone. Dawn doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It slips quietly, brushing skyscrapers with gold. Touching windows and streets. With the weightless inevitability of a truth. Everyone forgot to notice. Mamdani sits by his window. Coffee cooling beside him. His hands still tremble slightly. Not from fear, but from the recognition of what he saw. The world he built in theory did not crumble. It shifted. Breathed differently. And in that breath, he understood something that had eluded him for decades. Systems are not morality. Systems are mirrors. And mirrors can reflect truth, or power. Outside, life moves as if nothing happened. Children chase balls down cracked sidewalks. Taxi horns blare. Neon flickers on the corner deli. But the city feels different. A subtle rhythm has changed. A pulse that whispers. Everything can change. And it will, if you are awake to it. Mamdani exhales. Letting the tension drain slowly. Like ink bleeding from a pen. He doesn't feel defeated. Not entirely. He feels aware. A sharper awareness of the fragile lines. Between ambition, principle, and the machinery of power. He remembers the boy he once was. Dreaming of justice in classrooms and libraries. Scribbling notes on the nature of authority. Believing in the moral arc of the universe. He smiles faintly. Because he sees now. Moral arcs are invisible. They bend only when someone dares to guide them. And sometimes that someone isn't you. Sometimes it's the man who already plays the game. While the rest of us are still writing the rules. But that doesn't mean hope disappears. It means it must be chosen. Every day. Every moment. Freedom is not given. Freedom is carried. By the brave. By the aware. By those who refuse to let the machinery of the world dictate their soul. He thinks of the people out there. Scrolling, debating, living ordinary lives in extraordinary times. The truth is simple. You cannot buy freedom. You cannot legislate fairness. You can only choose who you will be. When everything falls apart. A breeze drifts through the window. It carries the scent of possibility. And something warmer than fear. A gentle reminder that life, even after upheaval, finds a way forward. Mamdani rises. Looks once more at the city. And whispers to himself. To the empty room. To history itself. We endure. We adapt. We begin again. Outside, the world continues its quiet rhythm. The machines hum. People speak. The air vibrates with the possibility of choice. And somewhere in the hum of New York streets, a subtle truth floats above it all. Power can shift. Systems can bend. And yet, humanity still matters. Not victory. Not revenge. Humanity. Because freedom isn't guaranteed. It is passed down, one brave choice at a time. So when your moment comes, what will you stand for? If this story made you think, share it. Because truth survives only when it's told. And maybe, that's how it all begins again. The city wakes slowly. Not to alarms or sirens. Not to the roar of traffic or the chatter of crowded sidewalks. It wakes to something quieter, awareness. People move through streets that feel the same. But their eyes are different. They carry an edge. A curiosity. A sense that something they assumed permanent has shifted beneath them. Somewhere in Midtown, a man stops at a crosswalk. He glances up at the towering buildings. Their steel and glass gleaming in the morning sun. And for the first time, he notices the reflection of himself in the window. Small, fragile, human. Yet undeniably part of something vast. History doesn't always arrive in explosions. Sometimes, it arrives in mirrors. Mamdani walks through the streets. Watching the rhythm of everyday life. Cafes serving coffee to students. Construction crews hammering. Street vendors calling prices with practiced precision. All ordinary. All predictable. Yet now, layered underneath, there is tension. A subtle awareness that life is moving. But the rules that govern it have just been rewritten. And that realization ignites something profound. Nothing is permanent. Everything is negotiable. Power exists only in the hands of those willing to seize it. He remembers the chessboard of his youth. Every move calculated. Every piece in position. Every consequence considered. He realizes now that the game was never just intellectual. It was alive. Every move carried weight beyond the board. Every strategy touched the streets, the classrooms, the courts, the media. And the man across town, the builder, the disruptor, the relentless force named Trump by history. He had learned that lesson first. He had learned how to bend rules without breaking them. How to exploit assumptions. How to turn perception into leverage. Mamdani feels it in his chest. The scholar can explain the storm. The player creates it. Across the nation, people begin to question. Not in protest. Not in politics. But in thought. Why do systems exist? Who benefits when rules are enforced selectively? If power can act without consequence, what remains for morality, for ideals, for justice? And with each question, the fabric of certainty begins to fray. Not loudly. Not violently. Just in the quiet spaces. Conversations at kitchen tables. Subtle debates in offices. Shared glances in crowded subways. The awakening is slow. It's almost imperceptible. Yet unstoppable. Mamdani pauses on a bridge. The river flows beneath him, dark and steady. Lights shimmer on the water. Reflections rippling like reality itself. Distorted yet undeniable. He inhales the cold morning air. It tastes of possibility. Of consequence. Of choices. He knows one truth. Understanding power is not enough. You must decide how to respond. And in that moment, he sees the shape of what comes next. The nation is awake now. The storm has passed. But its lessons linger. Power has spoken. And America, quietly, is listening. 3 words echo in his mind. Awareness changes everything. It begins quietly. A phone call. A letter. An email sent across encrypted channels. No one sees it coming. No one knows it matters. But it does. The first ripple of confrontation curls across the surface of a nation still reeling from the storm. Mamdani receives the message first. A single line, stripped of rhetoric. They are moving. Are you ready? He reads it 3 times. The last time, he lets it linger. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. A recognition that the game has changed. And now, it is personal. Across town, Trump watches the same city wake. Not with casual observation, but with calculation. Every building, every street, every person. Data points in a living network of influence. He knows power isn't won by speeches, votes, or headlines alone. It is won by anticipating reactions no one else sees. By moving pieces before anyone realizes they exist. By making the unseen felt. And the impossible inevitable. And in this city, in this moment. The first move of the next round is being played. Mamdani walks through campus halls. Professors glance at him sideways. Students whisper. The air hums with tension. He senses it in every interaction. Every polite nod. Every question phrased carefully. Every hand extended cautiously. It isn't hostility. Not yet. It is the recognition of change. The subtle understanding that one man's decision has redrawn the boundaries of influence. The professor understands clearly. The confrontation isn't just public. It is structural. It is legal. It is psychological. It is everything. Newsrooms light up. The pundits dissect every phrase. Every move. Every footstep of power is dissected, analyzed, scrutinized. Yet the truth evades them. Because this confrontation is invisible. It does not roar. It does not flash. It operates in shadows, in margins, in precedents most will never read. Trump understands that perception can mask reality. Mamdani understands that reality can mask perception. The nation sits between these two truths. Unaware that the conflict unfolding will define more than politics. It will define belief. Legitimacy. Faith in a system built on fragile trust. Even in quiet moments, Mamdani feels the pressure. Every decision, every lecture, every public statement is now filtered through this lens. Will this change the course? Will this survive the pivot? Will power bend it before reason prevails? And somewhere, deep in the machinery of governance, executives, advisors, strategists, and operators move pieces. Unseen but decisive. Because they have learned the hard truth. When confrontation begins, it isn't about who shouts loudest. It is about who moves first. He pauses at a window. The streets glow under morning light. People walking, unaware. Lives continuing in routine and rhythm. But the city feels heavier. Older. Like it remembers what was lost. And what is now at stake. Mamdani inhales. He exhales. He knows the next moves will not just test law, logic, or morality. They will test character. And America, quietly, deliberately, holds its breath. The city hums, but the hum is restless. Every footstep echoes differently now. Every conversation carries a subtle weight. Even the wind seems to whisper caution. Mamdani feels it most keenly in small moments. A student's hesitation. A colleague's carefully measured praise. A meeting room suddenly too quiet. The first signs of escalation are almost imperceptible. A policy shifted here. A precedent quietly referenced there. A decision that seems administrative. But beneath it, a current grows stronger. One that will carry force beyond imagination. Trump moves too. Not publicly. Not visibly. His strategy flows like water through cracks in stone. Finding leverage in bureaucracy, media, and perception. Every memo, every executive order, every handshake becomes a tool. Not for policy. For positioning. For shaping reality before anyone realizes it exists. And the nation, still waking from the storm, does not yet see the magnitude. It only feels the tension. The subtle friction beneath normalcy. Mamdani sits in his office. Books stacked, papers aligned. Pens sharp. The quiet of methodical thought. But method is no longer enough. The storm has passed, but its lessons linger. Action is faster than reflection. Perception moves quicker than argument. Power bends rules while philosophy debates them. He writes notes. Plans responses. Seeks allies quietly, strategically. Knowing every interaction now carries consequence. The confrontation is no longer theoretical. It is imminent. In boardrooms and courtrooms, in cafes and legislative offices. Whispers become conversations. Conversations become warnings. Warnings become plans. The machinery of escalation is subtle. It moves with patience. Like smoke curling through vents. Invisible, inevitable, relentless. The first minor clash occurs in committee hearings. Not violent. Not dramatic. Just rules applied differently than anyone expected. A single vote. A single sentence. Yet it signals something monumental. Nothing will be the same again. Across the country, ordinary citizens begin to notice shifts. Traffic laws enforced differently. Local ordinances interpreted unusually. Even casual conversations carry a hint of caution. As if society collectively recognizes that reality itself has become negotiable. Some panic. Some celebrate. Most feel unsettled. Because escalation is not loud. It is a creeping awareness that the game has changed. And that the pieces are moving faster than the board can hold them. Mamdani watches it all. And he understands the paradox. The more the system escalates to preserve itself, the more it exposes its fragility. He feels it in the room. In the streets. In the careful glances of those who thought they controlled the narrative. The city hums. But it is a nervous hum. The calm has gone. The storm is returning. Not in wind or rain. But in strategy, leverage, and the quiet violence of power applied with precision. 3 words settle over him. Nothing stays steady. Crisis doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It seeps in. Quietly. Like water beneath a doorframe. At first, it is small. A delayed memo. A misread headline. A whispered warning in the hallways of power. Mamdani feels it immediately. Not as panic. Not as anger. As clarity. The system is cracking. Not violently. But visibly. And this time, he knows it will affect more than policy or principle. It will touch lives. Every life. The first blow lands subtly. A decision he had counted on is overturned with bureaucratic efficiency. No explanation. No apology. Just a signature, a stamp, a cold recalibration. The scholar feels the shift like the snap of a steel cable. Years of theory, prediction, and reasoning cannot fully prepare a man for the velocity of action applied by someone who understands leverage. He sits at his desk, hands resting on polished wood. Watching the city move obliviously outside his window. People go to work. Students attend lectures. Life continues. But beneath it all, the foundations tremble. Trump's office is a study in calm. He is not shouting. He is not gesturing. He is watching the ripple effect of the first moves. Calculating the next. Every step of escalation has been measured. Every reaction anticipated. Every opponent accounted for. Even the ones who thought themselves untouchable. Power, he knows, is silent before it strikes. It is invisible before it becomes undeniable. The media senses it, though they cannot name it. Unexpected turn of events. They report. But the truth is larger, quieter, and far more precise. The system has been outmaneuvered. Pundits speculate. Anchors grow tense. Viewers argue in kitchens and living rooms. But no one fully grasps the magnitude of the realignment happening before their eyes. It is the calm of control before the chaos of consequence. A paradox the public feels. But cannot articulate. Mamdani walks the halls of the university. Students ask questions. Colleagues exchange glances. The air carries the electric weight of unspoken understanding. The rules they believed in. The frameworks they studied. The principles they taught. All bend when someone knows the system better than its caretakers. He realizes, in that moment, that crisis is not just an external event. It is internal. It is a reckoning with assumptions. With confidence. With the fragile belief that knowledge can protect you from action. Outside, the city continues. Subways roar. Taxi horns blare. Street vendors shout. Life goes on, indifferent to the tremors running beneath the streets. Beneath the courts, beneath the minds of those who once thought themselves safe. The crisis is not loud. It is precise. It is pervasive. It is the quiet understanding that nothing, not law, not precedent, not morality, can withstand a hand that knows how to use it. Mamdani exhales slowly. The city hums around him. And in that hum, he hears the truth. The storm is not coming. It is here. The collision doesn't announce itself with sirens or screams. It is subtle. A sharp intake of breath. A glance across a table. A pause in the rhythm of daily life. The moment when perception realizes it has been misled. Mamdani feels it first. Not in headlines. Not in speeches. But in the quiet spaces. A student hesitating mid-question. A colleague's words faltering under scrutiny. The hum of computers suddenly louder than normal. As if the machinery of power itself is holding its breath. He realizes, with a pang, that knowledge alone cannot withstand execution. That theory is fragile. Against action applied with precision. Trump watches the same city move. Yet he sees a different map. Every policy, every vote, every argument is a vector in a larger equation. One he controls not through force alone, but through anticipation. The collision is inevitable. The pieces were always moving toward this. Not chaos, not spectacle. But the unspoken confrontation. Between those who believe in rules. And those who understand how to bend them. The first public clash occurs quietly. A meeting of minds in a committee room. Words are chosen carefully. Arguments are rehearsed. Documents slide across tables like chess pieces. But beneath it all, something shifts. The balance of power is no longer theoretical. It is visible. It is immediate. And it is unstoppable. Mamdani senses the friction. He feels the pull of opposing forces. Intellect against leverage. Ethics against execution. Morality against survival. And in that tension, he understands the hard truth. The collision is not about right or wrong. It is about who can act while the other only debates. Across the city, the public perceives fragments. News reports hint at discord. Social media explodes with speculation. Analysts argue about consequences. But no one can fully articulate the movement beneath the surface. A quiet, unstoppable shift. That touches every level of governance. Power does not announce itself. It demonstrates. It executes. It bends expectation into reality. Mamdani leaves the meeting room. The corridor feels longer than before. The lights hum with tension. And as he walks, he knows. The collision has changed the rules of engagement. Not just for him. Not just for Trump. For everyone who believed that ideology alone could preserve influence. Because execution, quiet and relentless, does not ask permission. It does not negotiate. It simply arrives. And forces recognition. Outside, the city continues unaware. Trains roar. Markets buzz. Streetlights flicker. But inside offices, courtrooms, and minds, the first spark of collision grows into a wave. A wave that will reshape assumptions. Challenge ideals. And leave no one untouched. Mamdani exhales. A single thought echoes. The game has changed. And now, everyone must play. The city moves as if nothing has happened. Buses run. Coffee brews. Children chatter on the sidewalks. But beneath the hum of daily life, fractures run like veins of ice through steel. Small at first. Almost invisible. But spreading, inevitable. Mamdani notices them first. A policy misapplied here. A precedent reinterpreted there. A subtle shift in conversation tone. The pause before words are spoken. The very air vibrates with quiet unease. Trump watches, always observing. Calculating the trajectory of every ripple. He knows fractures can be dangerous. He also knows they can be opportunities. Each crack in the system is a chance to bend perception, to solidify control, to turn hesitation into leverage. And now, the first fractures widen into chasms. Legal arguments are questioned. Alliances reconsidered. The logic of once solid structures begins to wobble under the weight of applied power. Mamdani feels it in his bones. Years of study, debate, and moral reasoning cannot withstand the precision of someone who understands how to exploit subtle shifts. The classroom becomes a battlefield. The university corridors echo with uncertainty. Even students feel it. The first tremor of doubt. That knowledge alone is insufficient in the face of relentless action. In offices across the city, aides whisper. Politicians shift their stances. Journalists rephrase headlines to reflect ambiguity. The first fractures in confidence ripple outward. Everyone begins to realize the truth. This is no longer about ideology or fairness. It is about control. Not control over people. Not control over law. Control over the narrative. The system. And the unseen levers that move the nation. Mamdani pauses at a window. The streets below continue as if nothing has changed. But he knows better. The fractures have begun. Small, almost invisible. But capable of toppling assumptions once considered immutable. He inhales. He exhales. And in that breath, he accepts a grim truth. Knowledge is powerless without leverage. Theory without execution is just hope. And hope, when misapplied, can be weaponized. Outside, the sun cuts through the morning haze. The city sparkles with normalcy. Yet the fractures are everywhere. Invisible, but undeniable. And as Mamdani walks away from the window, he whispers to himself. Mamdani stands at a literal and figurative crossroads. A quiet street corner in the city. Traffic humming, pedestrians weaving past him like currents in a river. And yet, he feels the weight of something far heavier than asphalt or concrete. Every decision, every hesitation, every word spoken in these last weeks has brought him here. Not to a lecture hall. Not to a courtroom. But to a point where theory collides with action. Where morality meets strategy. And where the smallest move can ripple into a tidal wave. Trump, in his own domain, watches the same moment unfold differently. He doesn't cross streets, he crosses thresholds of power. Each handshake, each memo, each subtle rearrangement is a statement. The rules bend. The system listens. The nation watches, often unaware of the full scale. It is here, at this unseen intersection, that confrontation begins to crystallize. Not as chaos. Not as spectacle. But as the recognition of inevitability. Mamdani's phone buzzes. A single message. No signature. No explanation. Just 3 words. Decide your move. He stares at the screen. Mind racing. Heart steady but tense. He knows the options are limited. Not in morality. Not in intelligence. But in impact. Every action has consequence. Every hesitation is exploited. Every moral certainty is challenged. Across town, the city itself seems to hold its breath. Street vendors pause mid-call. Subway doors hiss with unusual finality. Even the morning sun feels sharper. As if it can see the fractures in the world and illuminates them deliberately. The crossroads is more than a street corner. It is a metaphor. It is a reckoning. It is the point where belief and action diverge. Mamdani considers the path ahead. One route preserves principle. but risks irrelevance. Another route compromises morality, but gains leverage. A third is invisible. A maneuver so subtle it may never be recognized. Yet its effects will ripple endlessly. He inhales. He exhales. And in that breath, clarity emerges. Inaction is the only true defeat. Outside, life continues, unaware. The city pulses. Machines hum. People move. Yet above the routine, the tension thickens. A nation poised on the edge of revelation. Mamdani steps forward. Not blindly. Not rashly. But with the weight of understanding and the certainty of consequence. And in that step, the first motion toward resolution begins. The first motion toward choice. The choice is made. Not loudly. Not ceremoniously. Just quietly, deliberately. A move across the board that will ripple further than anyone anticipates. Mamdani watches the first effects unfold. A meeting that was supposed to be routine becomes tense. Colleagues shift uncomfortably. Students sense the undercurrent. Even the walls seem to hum with expectation. Cause meets effect. Action meets consequence. Trump, observing from another vantage, notices immediately. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't signal. He simply notes the shift. Another piece moved. Another reaction triggered. Another assumption corrected. For those watching the game from the outside, nothing seems different. But for those inside, the rules have changed irrevocably. In government offices, in courtrooms, in academic halls. The first cracks widen. Policies reconsidered. Precedents reinterpreted. Allies reassess loyalty. Adversaries recalculate strategies. Even small mistakes carry disproportionate weight now. Because when power moves decisively, every misstep is magnified. Mamdani feels the weight. Not panic. Not regret. But a sober understanding. Every choice carries consequence. Every inaction is a decision. Every principle may collide with reality. The city outside moves on. Subways roar. Taxi horns blare. People live their ordinary lives, oblivious to the invisible forces shifting the framework beneath them. And yet, nothing is ordinary. A colleague approaches, tentative. The decision, will it hold? Mamdani looks out the window. The light glints off glass and steel. The city is alive, moving, unaware. He nods slowly. It already has consequences. Now we see what they are. The first domino falls. And then another. And another. It is not dramatic. Not violent. But it is unavoidable. The tension rises. The system groans under unseen pressure. And America, quietly, begins to notice. Because for the first time, it becomes clear. Actions without understanding of leverage are powerless. Leverage without understanding of consequence is dangerous. Mamdani exhales. The city hums around him. And in that hum, a lesson reverberates. Every move matters. Every choice echoes. Every consequence arrives. The city watches. Not the city as a whole, but millions of eyes, screens, and voices. All focused, consciously or unconsciously, on the ripples of actions they barely understand. Mamdani feels the scrutiny first. A reporter's question in the hall. A whispered comment in a classroom. The careful attention of colleagues who were once allies. He senses it like static in the air. A vibration that touches every surface, making every movement heavier. Every word more measured. Trump, of course, thrives in this attention. He understands that scrutiny can be manipulated. That perception is often more powerful than truth. And that fear, anticipation, and admiration can all be orchestrated from behind the scenes. Every public gaze, every media headline, every whisper becomes a part of the machinery. And in this machine, actions are amplified beyond their original intent, distorting reality into something more pliable, more controllable. Mamdani reflects. The pressure is real, but not external. It comes from the knowledge that the world is watching. That even his smallest errors will be dissected and replayed. In 100 classrooms, conference rooms, and newsrooms. It is the modern form of trial. Not by jury or law, but by observation. By judgment. By the relentless, invisible court of public perception. In hallways and cafes, ordinary citizens debate. The details are fuzzy. The context often missing. But the emotional resonance is unmistakable. This is a story about power. About choices. About consequences beyond comprehension. And scrutiny, once diffused over time, now arrives instantaneously. It doesn't wait. It doesn't soften. It hits like a pulse. Felt across screens, phones, and minds. Mamdani exhales, heavy but resolute. He knows scrutiny is inevitable. He also knows it is a test. Of patience, of courage, of understanding. And of the ability to act without being consumed by observation. He reminds himself of one truth. Clarity in action is more important than comfort in opinion. The city hums outside. The sun reflects on glass towers. People walk, live, work, unaware of the subtleties shaping the rules around them. But Mamdani feels it. The pressure. The judgment. The truth. Every choice now carries its own audience. And every audience carries its own consequence. Mamdani sits alone in his office. The city hums beneath him. Lights reflecting in glass like stars fallen onto concrete. It is quiet. But the weight of decision presses down with a gravity no one else can see. He understands something fundamental. To act decisively in a system of power is to accept loss. Not necessarily of life. Not necessarily of freedom. But of comfort, certainty, and innocence. Every choice has a cost. Every principle, when tested, demands tribute. Trump, from his vantage, sees the same truth differently. He sacrifices what others cling to. Morality in perception. Approval in public. Relationships in private. All for leverage. He does not hesitate. He does not flinch. Mamdani, by contrast, weighs every action against the invisible ledger of ethics, questioning which sacrifices are justified, and which would consume his humanity. The first real consequence arrives swiftly. An ally, once trusted, chooses safety over principle, walking away from commitments that now seem too dangerous. Another opponent uses a misstep to advance quietly. Not in outrage, but in strategy. Mamdani feels the sting. Sacrifice is not abstract. It arrives in faces. In glances. In the subtle rearrangement of loyalty. He walks through campus corridors. Students notice the tension. Colleagues feel the shift. Everything is familiar. And yet subtly different. The normalcy of daily life overlaying a reality that has fractured. He understands the paradox. To protect systems of thought. To maintain integrity. He must relinquish pieces of comfort, safety, and even certainty. Not everyone will survive intact. Not everyone will understand. Outside, the city moves as if nothing has changed. Streetlights blink. Taxis roar. Markets bustle. Life continues. But Mamdani knows. To navigate power is to accept a truth many refuse to see. Sacrifice is not optional. It is inevitable. He pauses at a window. The wind carries the faint scent of possibility. Of consequence. Of risk. He whispers to himself. To the city below. To history itself. Every choice takes something. Every action leaves a scar. And yet, we must act. The city doesn't roar. It watches. It waits. Every movement, every decision, every ripple of power feels magnified in the stillness before revelation. Mamdani feels the weight of the days behind him. Each choice, each sacrifice, each confrontation has led to this moment. The ledger of action is full. The cost is clear. And now comes reckoning. Not theoretical, not abstract. But immediate, inevitable, personal. Trump watches from the other side of the chessboard. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't move hastily. The reckoning is not his alone. It belongs to everyone who underestimated the velocity of his decisions. Everyone who believed systems were immutable. Everyone who thought leverage could be ignored. Across the city, the fractures widen. A policy overturn triggers a cascade of confusion. A precedent challenged sparks debates in courts and classrooms alike. Allegiances shift quietly but irrevocably. Every player now understands the truth. The game is no longer about rules. It is about survival, adaptation, and timing. Mamdani walks through corridors of power. The walls hum with unspoken tension. Colleagues glance sideways. Allies question loyalty. Enemies watch carefully. He recognizes the paradox. The closer one is to the center of power, the more visible the consequences. And the more isolated the individual. Every decision he made, every choice of action or restraint, has led to this nexus. The weight of awareness presses like steel. Outside, ordinary citizens sense something without naming it. The news cycles churn. Voices argue online. Coffee shops buzz with speculation. Yet the true reckoning is quiet, invisible, systemic. The alignment of consequence and action. The moment where intent meets inevitability. Mamdani pauses at a bridge, watching the river flow. It moves, unstoppable, indifferent. And he realizes. Power is like water. It adapts. It shifts. It flows around obstacles. And if you stand still, it erodes you. He inhales. Exhales. And whispers to himself. The storm was never outside. It was inside. The hum of the city carries the words. Silent. Persistent. Unyielding. 3 words echo through him. The sky darkens, not with clouds, but with inevitability. It isn't a literal storm. It is a storm of consequence. Rising faster than anyone expected. Touching every corner of the city. Every office, every classroom, every quiet apartment. Mamdani feels it first in his chest. A low, building tension that vibrates through his thoughts. Through his decisions. Through the careful calculations he once believed were sufficient. The storm has arrived. And it will not wait for understanding. Trump watches the effects unfold with precision. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need headlines. The storm is a manifestation of leverage executed flawlessly. Every ripple, every crack, every hesitation has been orchestrated. And now, he simply observes the world bend beneath its own rules. In government offices, corridors hum with panic disguised as professionalism. Decisions are reversed. Alliances fracture. The subtle rules that once guided behavior no longer hold. The first public confrontation erupts. Not in violence. Not in spectacle. But in exposure. Truths long hidden are revealed. Mistakes magnified. Perceptions shattered. Mamdani stands in the center of it, watching the storm sweep through. Not helpless, but aware. This is the point where clarity is tested. Where morality is tested. Where action meets consequence without hesitation. He sees faces of allies and adversaries alike. Some frozen in disbelief. Some adapting. Some already planning the next move. The storm is impartial. It does not distinguish right from wrong. It only amplifies reality. Across the city, citizens feel it. The economy shifts. News cycles roar. Social media ignites. Even those who thought themselves safe sense the trembling foundation beneath them. The storm is a reminder. Power is not gentle. Leverage is not kind. Action is unstoppable once set in motion. Mamdani exhales, steady, deliberate. The city hums around him. The storm rages. But inside, he finds focus. He whispers to himself. You cannot stop the storm. You can only navigate it. 3 words linger in the air. The storm passes. Not entirely. Not cleanly. But it moves on, leaving traces in the streets, in minds, in systems. Mamdani steps outside. The city smells of wet asphalt, coffee, and something harder to define. The faint trace of upheaval that lingers long after the news cycles have moved on. Sidewalks are crowded. People talk. Life continues. And yet, everything feels different. Trump observes the aftermath quietly. He does not gloat. He does not boast. The storm has proven the principle. Leverage moves faster than morality. Execution moves faster than theory. Perception moves faster than comprehension. He already anticipates the next wave. Already calculates the next ripple. The game continues. Even as the city rebuilds itself from within. Mamdani walks through campus corridors. Students glance nervously. Colleagues whisper. Every conversation is now layered with awareness. An understanding that the world is more fragile than it appears. He reflects on what the storm revealed. Not just power. Not just manipulation. But the human tendency to assume stability. And how quickly stability can vanish. The fractures are visible now. Not destructive in a physical sense. But subtle. Misaligned systems, shaken trust, disrupted routines. Every decision made in the past weeks has left its mark. And yet, in the midst of upheaval, there is clarity. Reality is mutable. Systems are fragile. Human awareness determines survival. Outside, citizens carry on. Some debate online. Some notice nothing. Some feel a vague unease in their daily routines. But Mamdani knows the true lesson of aftermath. It is not in the noise. Not in the headlines. Not in the debates. But in quiet reflection. In understanding cause and effect. In learning from disruption before the next wave hits. He pauses on a bridge, watching the river flow dark and steady beneath him. It reflects the city lights, fractured but beautiful. He exhales slowly. And whispers. The storm passes. But the lessons remain. 3 words echo softly. The city breathes differently now. The air carries a faint tension. But also a quiet resilience. Windows reflect sunlight differently. Streets feel longer. And the rhythm of life is tinged with awareness. Mamdani walks slowly. Not in despair. Not in triumph. But in observation. Every step deliberate. Every glance catalogued. The city is alive. But it has changed. Trump, from another vantage, watches too. He does not intervene. He does not announce victories. He waits. Measuring reactions. Understanding that power now lies not just in action, but in the adaptation of those around him. The game continues. Not with violence. Not with noise. But with strategy, patience, and leverage. Mamdani meets with colleagues. They discuss, quietly but with urgency, how to adapt to a system reshaped by recent events. Every policy, every precedent, every principle must now be examined through the lens of reality. Some resist. Some accept. Some argue. But the rebuilding is methodical, deliberate, necessary. Across the city, the citizens carry on. Some notice subtle improvements. Some notice subtle failures. Markets recover. Schools reopen. News cycles shift. But underneath, a collective understanding has grown. The world is not static. It cannot be assumed. It must be navigated. Mamdani pauses at a window. The streets are alive, but quieter now. The lessons of the storm resonate in his mind. Clarity in action is indispensable. Awareness is power. Every decision carries consequence. He reflects on sacrifice, confrontation, and reckoning. And realizes the truth. Rebuilding is not just repair. It is transformation. The wind carries a faint hint of possibility. Mamdani exhales, steady and deliberate. And whispers to the city below. Change is never given. It is earned. It is chosen. 3 words echo softly in the urban hum. The city moves with cautious confidence. People walk faster, talk quieter. Yet there is a rhythm that suggests awareness has deepened. Nothing is taken for granted. Every action is weighed. Every glance considered. Mamdani stands in his office, looking over the city skyline. He no longer fears the storm. He respects it. He has learned that true foresight is not about predicting the future, but understanding the currents beneath it. The invisible forces that shape outcomes. And the human nature that bends, resists, and reacts. Trump, as always, anticipates. Not with arrogance. Not with haste. But with quiet calculation. He knows the city is adjusting. But adjustments can be nudged. Ripples can be created. Perceptions can be molded. And leverage maintained. The lesson of foresight is simple. Those who see before others move first. Those who move first shape the rules. Mamdani meets with a group of advisors. They discuss the implications of the storm. The fractures, the confrontations, the consequences. Every decision is now filtered through a lens sharpened by experience. They speak not of ideals alone, but of practical application. Of surviving the system while retaining integrity. It is a delicate balance. Not everyone will agree. Not every solution is clean. But foresight demands clarity, courage, and patience. Across the city, citizens continue life. Some aware, some oblivious. All impacted by the invisible forces at work. Schools, markets, offices. All subtly transformed by the echoes of conflict. Every conversation carries memory. Every policy carries consequence. The storm taught lessons that cannot be unlearned. And foresight now acts as a bridge. Between understanding and action. Between reaction and mastery. Mamdani stands at a window. The sunlight glints off the city streets. He exhales slowly, feeling the weight of knowledge and the thrill of anticipation. He whispers to himself. To the city. To the system that surrounds him. See the currents. Move with purpose. Shape what comes next. 3 words resonate through the silence. The city glows under evening lights. Windows shimmer like embers. The streets buzz quietly with life. And in this calm, Mamdani pauses. Not from fear. Not from hesitation. But from reflection. He recalls the storm. The fractures. The sacrifices. Every confrontation. Every consequence. Every lesson etched in the quiet corridors of power. Trump observes from afar. Unmoved by applause, untouched by outrage. He knows reflection is fleeting in the world of action. But even he considers the cost of leverage. The currency of execution. And the toll exacted when the system bends to will. Mamdani walks through campus halls. Students talk quietly. Colleagues study reports. The air vibrates with subtle awareness. A mixture of anxiety and opportunity. Fear and hope. He realizes. Reflection is not passive. It is preparation. It is understanding. It is choosing who you will be before the next wave hits. He thinks of the choices he made. The sacrifices he endured. The confrontations he navigated. Some yielded results. Some created new challenges. Some revealed truths about himself he could never have anticipated. He recognizes a paradox. To act is to risk. To risk is to learn. To learn is to evolve. The city carries on around him. Even in the aftermath of storm and fracture, life adapts. Buildings remain. Traffic flows. Voices debate. And yet, beneath the ordinary, he feels the pulse of possibility. The awareness that choices create legacies. And foresight allows one to navigate a world that never stands still. He pauses at a window, looking at the glittering streets below. Lights reflect uncertainty and opportunity alike. He exhales, quietly, deliberately. And whispers. Every action leaves a trace. Every choice defines a path. And every reflection guides the next move. 3 words settle in the calm. The city hums, quiet but insistent. Everything feels connected. As if the streets, the lights, the people, even the air itself, are threads woven into a single tapestry. Mamdani feels it. Not in theory. Not in calculation. But in instinct. Every consequence, every choice, every sacrifice has converged into this moment. A point where understanding, action, and morality intersect. Trump, across town, moves like a shadow on this same tapestry. Every strategy aligns with foresight. Every ripple is anticipated. Every reaction measured. He sees convergence not as coincidence, but as orchestration. And in that orchestration, influence becomes undeniable. Mamdani reflects on the lessons of the storm. The fractures. The sacrifices. The scrutiny. He realizes the power of convergence. That human intention, system behavior, and timing can collide to produce outcomes far beyond expectation. It is not control. Not domination. But alignment. A recognition of forces at play. And the ability to act with awareness within them. Across the city, the echoes of consequence still linger. Every policy, every relationship, every debate has been touched by the past weeks. Life continues. But nothing is as it was before. Mamdani understands. The convergence is not static. It is dynamic. It is alive. It will continue to evolve with every choice. He walks the campus quietly, observing. Students, unaware of the depth of orchestration, debate passionately. Colleagues strategize cautiously. The system hums with latent energy. In this moment, Mamdani realizes the paradox. Freedom exists in awareness. Influence exists in understanding. And the human spirit exists in choice. He pauses at a window, overlooking streets lit like veins of light. He exhales slowly, deliberately. And whispers to himself, to the city. To the invisible currents that guide all outcomes. Everything intersects. Everything matters. And everything continues. 3 words echo softly. The night finally softens. Streetlights glow like quiet lanterns. The city exhales. A rhythm returns, slower, steadier. Not because everything is resolved. But because awareness has settled. Mamdani walks along a quiet avenue. He feels the weight of the storm behind him. The fractures, the sacrifices, the scrutiny. And the convergence of choices that shape this new reality. And yet, there is clarity. Not in control. Not in certainty. But in understanding. Trump watches too, quietly. He knows the work continues. But in the stillness, even leverage rests. Even influence pauses. And even power, when wielded with calculation, must reconcile with the reality it touches. Mamdani stops, looking at a small park bathed in soft light. Children play, oblivious to the forces that shape their world. People walk dogs, talk quietly, argue, laugh. Life continues. Fragile. Persistent. Human. He reflects. Freedom is not granted. Integrity is not preserved by inertia. Understanding is not static. It is in choices made. In actions taken. In awareness sharpened by experience. He whispers into the night. We endure. We learn. We continue. The city hums around him. Lights flicker. Cars pass. Life moves on. And in that movement, there is hope. Not certainty. Not victory. But the gentle truth that the human spirit persists. Even when systems bend and storms pass. A final thought settles in his mind, almost like a mantra. The storm ends. The lessons remain. And the choice is always ours. Fade to black. The city sleeps. But not entirely. A faint pulse hums beneath the streets. In the corridors of power. In the quiet hearts of those who watch, who wait, who act. Mamdani stands alone. Looking out over lights that flicker like distant stars. He feels the weight of everything past. The storm, the fractures, the sacrifices, the scrutiny, the convergence, the lessons. And yet, there is calm. Not triumph. Not closure. But understanding. Trump, somewhere else, sits quietly. No words. No gestures. Just awareness. The knowledge that influence is never final. That leverage is always tested. That every choice leaves a ripple in the vast network of consequence. Mamdani inhales, slowly. He exhales, deliberately. The night carries 1,000 quiet lessons. And he whispers them to himself. To the city. To the human spirit that persists no matter the storm. Freedom is fragile. Truth is fleeting. And courage. Courage is always required. The city breathes around him. Every window, every street, every distant hum. Feels alive with possibility. He understands now that the story is never over. Every action, every choice, every ripple shapes what comes next. And in the stillness, he smiles quietly. Not at victory. Not at survival. But at the human capacity to endure. To learn, to act, to persist. He leans closer to the night. And whispers the final truth. Softly, almost reverently.